Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this Rebuilding Australia Zoom. Today we have the pleasure of hearing from Linda Ford, who is a knowledgeable, purposeful, exceptional speaker and author, practitioner in the area of today's presentation. Let me give you a little bit of background on Linda. You're okay with that, Linda? Is that all right?
Yep, thanks, Charles.
All right. So today's presenter, ladies and gentlemen, is Linda Ford. For 37 years, she's worked across Queensland, South Australia and Victoria in local and state government and in business and community services, both paid and voluntary. Nearly 20 of those years she's spent in Logan City in Queensland. Throughout her career, she's embedded cultural diversity in policy, program design and business practices. For 25 years, she's actively practiced interculturalism, an intentional bringing together of people from different cultural, faith, language backgrounds. In 2007, she discovered this approach had a name, interculturalism. And since 2013, she's been consistent advocate for governments to adopt intercultural frameworks in their policies and strategies around the world. So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome Linda Ford. Linda, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Charles, for the introduction and again for inviting me to speak at your Rebuilding Australia webinars. Charles is going to keep an eye on the chat for us today and we'll go through questions and comments at the end. First of all, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which I'm privileged to live, work and play, the Wurundjeri, Woiwurrung and Bunurong peoples. And I pay my respects to elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples joining us today. When we talk about connection, civility and resilience and belonging, we actually are standing with our First Nations peoples who have held those ideas for more than 65,000 years. There are parts of the webinar today that may be confronting and some of them are references to foul language, which I will not say, but you'll see it written up on the screen, and also scenarios that might upset some people. And that's, you know, I'm trying to keep it light, but incivility is what it is, unfortunately. So unfortunately, there will be a couple of slides to do with that. I'm just trying to move the screen. Why is that not working? Apologies. There we go. Just a little bit of a glitch. Okay, so today we're going to cover a few things. Firstly, how everyday incivility begins and then it spreads in communities and workplaces and schools and in other spatial situations. We're also looking at how kindness, curiosity and intercultural interactions will be the antidote for those. And then how councils, workplaces and residents can spark unity in their towns and how they can do that now. I want to begin today by asking you to think back to 2019. How often did you feel that you experienced incivility? Can I get you to put a number in the chat box, please, of whether it was 1 to 7 days or a fortnight, month, every couple of months? How often do you think that that occurred? And I'll get Charles just to read out some of those numbers for us.
Once a week from Andrew? Yep.
Yep.
I think that's a good number, probably, at least once a week.
Yep. Okay. And then the next question becomes, how often in 2025 do you feel that you have or are experiencing incivility in your life? Again, 1 to 7 days, to a fortnight, month, every couple of months.
I think it's doubled for me. Yep. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Peter.
What do we have there, Charles?
More often, partly driven through macro climate, says Andrew. And Melissa Penny says more often. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So I think, thanks everyone. Charles and I think agree that incivility has increased a lot in the last 6 years, and it's for a lot of reasons. You know, the social media, the polarization and culture wars at the local, state, international levels. Also the economic pressures and cost of living, The after effects of the pandemic as well, I think, have created some lasting psychological and social effects. And then we also have, and because of all of your roles, you'll know this, I don't have to tell you, this decline in civic and community participation, that people are not participating in local organisations anymore. They're not anymore, but as much as they were. They're not volunteering as much as they were. And I think that takes away from us the opportunity that we used to have to meet people who are not like us in many different ways. So the more people, the fewer people that we meet, the more likely it is that we become afraid of people or intolerant of them. So none of us is immune to being on either end of someone else's incivility or being the one who's actually uncivil. So I just want to quickly, don't worry about putting this in the chat box, but I just want you to think about for a few seconds the last time somebody did something where you felt small, and it really may have just been an eye roll. It could have been somebody being a bit impatient with you, standing in a line. But what were the emotions that you felt? And then what did you do? And how did you feel about what you did or didn't do? Because part of incivility is actually self-reflection. Okay. And then the flip side is that not only are we not immune to being on the other end of it, but we're also not immune to doing it ourselves to other people. And again, for all of those factors we talked about before, in social media, for example, and pandemic, etc., what did you do that might have made somebody feel small? And then how did you feel about doing that after the action itself? Right, so I'd like to talk now about incivility itself. And it's the sharp moments that stick with us. That it's not always big, although I will talk to you a little bit about one big thing that happened to me recently, but it's not always big. And it's very much about everyday incivility. It's the audible sigh that we give at a checkout, or we hear somebody being that little rude at the checkout woman, or somebody in hospitality. It's posts that are online that mock other people, or who really drive conflict for conflict's sake. They're having fun. And it's also, it could be as simple as the neighbor who doesn't wave at you anymore and you wonder why that might have happened, or doesn't talk to you. I'm not going to go through each of these in any great detail, and these are off the top of my head, so no doubt there are others. If you think of other forms of incivility, please put them into the chat box. When we talk about verbal incivility, we're talking about words and tone, and the impact of that, something as simple as that word or tone, is about eroding trust and confidence and a sense of safety in community, and often for us individually. Behavioral incivility is when we show disregard for other people and their dignity. And again, that can lead to people feeling unsafe in their own community. And it also weakens social cohesion in a community the more often it occurs. Digital incivility, we don't need to talk about that. Again, social media and the fun of conflict and trolling people. Is social incivility, which is the subtle ways that we make people feel invisible or unwelcome somewhere. And that could be as simple as not including somebody into your group. I was at a conference last week, for example, and just because I don't like being the person standing there looking around for someone to talk to me, every time I see that, I just say to someone, come into this group. And very quickly, they become part of the conversation, and we always learn something from them. And this happened to be a construction conference, and it was absolutely fascinating hearing about people's journeys to get into the positions that they were holding. So we want to make sure we're not marginalising individuals, families, and communities. This is the one that we as local government staff, elected members, state, federal governments can look at the way that we do things here, because we can be embedding or normalising disengagement and disadvantage if we don't think about how we practice within our government, within our governments, within our range of things that we do. Some of them are about forms, some of them are around not having access to professional interpreters, some of them might be posters that don't reflect the local community that are up throughout council or through libraries. So all of these things, again, start to normalise disengagement and disadvantage and separateness from the community by that government or community organisation. Environmental incivility is about the neglect or misuse of shared environments. And I think that it damages pride, that it is a problem for sharing spaces, and it might actually lead in many cases to a feeling of a community being unsafe. Sorry, even though it's not. Oops. Oh, that's right. Sorry. I just moved everyone around so that I could see a bit better. Right, and then emotional incivility. And this is something that older people have told me that they experience much more often than they would like to, which is people basically saying to them, oh yeah, that'll be okay, don't worry about it, or no, I don't have time for that now. And that increases their loneliness because they're much less likely to reach out to get support and assistance and to try to make friends or be included in other groups. And then the final one is around cultural incivility, and that's about failing to pay respect to cultural norms. And again, that's not about where you were born necessarily. It's also about the culture of the community, the workplace, the group that you're involved with. And so I want to know, when did all of this incivility happen? Because it has happened much more often, as we know, over the last 5 years. And when we look at Australia, we see that we are the second highest country on earth for median wealth. Luxembourg's actually the first. We're the 12th country, wealthiest country in the world for GDP, per GDP. And we're the 11th highest standard of living country in the world. So for me, it's like, what the heck, if we are uncivil, if we are the ones who are being rude and who are not respecting other people, then when do we stop? What does this end up looking like? And how much higher do we need to get on all of these scales before we realize how very lucky we are and that we really don't have very much to complain about at all? Now, I want to tell you about an experience of incivility that I had about 3 weeks ago. I think it was the 8th of October. I went back to my hometown of Brisbane, and I had 2 experiences in one day, actually, and both were very unsettling, but the morning experience was the worst. So I was looking for a chemist, and I drove into a shopping centre that I'd been to many, many times over the years. As you can see here on my dodgy little red drawing, if you come around and you turn left, you would see that there is the car park, and that's the left way is the one-way section. I didn't actually know that, and the arrow to indicate to turn left wasn't very clear, and the arrow on the ground was quite faint, the one that says, this way, that arrow. So I almost drove into the parking area the wrong way. As you can see, it wouldn't have created a 4-car pileup. It wouldn't have created any sort of accident. But as I went to drive forward, I saw a man running over to me, coming out of the door of the shopping centre, and he put his head down at my window and he said, "It's one way, you moron." I thought, well, okay, all right. I looked at him and he walked behind the car to go to his car. I reversed. I didn't reverse over him. I just reversed the car, and I turned left into the car park. And as I did that, I saw that his wife was next to my car. And so I asked her why her husband had been so rude to me. And she said, "You can, off, you, stupid, Right. So again, I thought, wow, this is really serious. And this has all happened within the space of a minute. This is awful. And I've been living overseas for 2 years. I'm like, this is awful. What is going on here? Now, my memory of a similar situation as a kid would have been, even if we'd felt any need to get involved in it in the first place, something like, "Hey, mate, you're going the wrong way." If you were with my dad, he would have said, "You bloody wombat." Right? That would have been the most insulting thing, the ultimate insult, "You bloody wombat." So the outcome of my interaction that morning was that I asked the wife to thank her husband, his wife, to thank her husband for giving me a story to tell at this webinar. It was really distressing, but I think the webinar would not have been as good without my little dodgy red line drawing and those slides. Now, as I said, I've been living overseas, and it seems to me to be really different in Australia to when I left 2 years ago. And maybe it isn't. Maybe I was just the frog in the hot water that was sort of, starting to boil. But in comparison to a number of other countries, I lived in 4 countries and we went through 17. So I've got a bit of recent experience. The first thing that I noticed when I got back was the lack of patience and tolerance for other people, such as the Buranda car park. The second is the amount of swearing, and it seems like everyone and everywhere is swearing, regardless of the context or the location. And for me, there was a civility in swearing being limited to the pub or the footy, but I think that's gone now. When I started to think about swearing, I realized that the only adults that I know who do this are people from second or more generation Australian backgrounds. And that's me, 4th generation on every side, 7th on another. So these are the people I know, and I'm like, wow, this is incredible. And I know some Brits who swear, but there aren't as many, and there's certainly nowhere near as many as people who are born in Australia from European backgrounds. And again, I don't understand why. I don't know why it's the case, but I'm also interested in finding out if this is the experience of other people on the webinar. So I'm going to ask you, from 0% being no change at all and 100% being total change, how much has public swearing become more prevalent over the last 5 years in your experience? Charles, do we have any responses there?
Yeah, I said 50% more.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Definitely. Andrew says definitely.
Yeah.
And I know I'm doing it myself. Yes, that's the challenge, isn't it? Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Jocelyn says I'd agree. Alan Connolly says hi. Melissa says about 50%. Yep.
Okay. So I think we're in agreement that it's become more prevalent, but also the places where it's happening is also more unusual. And those places, sorry, are not usually appropriate. Sorry.
Very true.
Now, the last bit of incivility that I've seen are people walking down the street and littering. So throwing away a plastic milk bottle after they've finished drinking it, throwing away McDonald's wrappings in the gutter. And around the corner from my house, there was a paint tin that someone had deliberately poured the paint into the gutter to go down the drain. And I'd like to know when it became okay to do this, because it says something about where we live, what we think of other people, what we think of our environment, our wildlife, and how it feels to walk through neighbourhoods that are like this. We know a few things about incivility. First of all, it's contagious. When something happens and it goes unchecked, it's likely to spread. And we know that people who witness or experience incivility are more likely to behave rudely to other people. That one small act of disrespect can outweigh multiple positive interactions. And there have been studies on this negativity bias. A scientist by the name of Gottman has created a 5-to-1 ratio in interpersonal interactions, which shows that one negative act needs 5 positive acts in order to balance it. And that is a real problem, because if you're living in a reasonably isolated way, chances are you may not get 5 positive experiences to help you balance it. We also know that incivility is expensive. Even clearing away litter is expensive. People yelling or acting aggressively starts to have other people withdrawing from participating in society, and that it affects some groups more than others. And, I wonder, how would my 85-year-old mother have felt if that man or woman at Buranda abused her? And that's her local shopping centre. What would it have done to my 17-year-old nephew who's learning to drive? What would his confidence have been like? how much more amplified would that experience have been for someone who had experienced significant trauma in their life? And that could be a whole range of trauma, domestic violence, for example. It could have been abuse growing up as children. It could have been something that happened overseas. And then what would it have been like for someone of color? Because I'm almost sure that this man would have brought some kind of racist abuse into that scenario as well. He was a wholly unpleasant individual. And so for me, the next element of all of this is that it can be fixed. And one of the aspects that has occurred over the last, I think, 15 years is that Scanlon Foundation has created the Mapping Social Cohesion report that's come out annually. In 2024, Australia's overall social cohesion score was 78, which was the same in 2023. And we might think, oh, 78 is pretty good. But actually, it's a record low since the index began in 2007. So 2 years in a row have been record lows. The other metrics that they used showed some mixed results, such as a decline in the sense of belonging, a slight increase in neighbourhood trust, but that there were ongoing challenges with financial dissatisfaction and discrimination. So communities fracture not through big explosions like the guy that I met in the car park. That certainly affected my sense of self and my sense of safety that day. But communities fracture through small daily acts of incivility that chip away at trust and sense of belonging. It erodes it erodes through those small things, such as sarcasm in a meeting. We've all been there. An impatient comment at a counter at Woolworths, an online post by somebody who's trying to do the right thing and is mocked or abused, an assumption that someone whose first language isn't English and that they must not understand, they might be, stupid and have to be yelled at in order to get the message across. Each of these moments build a culture of caution, and people start to avoid conversations. Stereotypes about others harden, and then we start to shrink our empathy because, again, we're not knowing as many people, we're not understanding them, we're not thinking about their lives and what they bring to our community. And ultimately, committees lose diversity, and then rumours fill the gaps where relationships used to be. But there's fantastic news, which is that civility is contagious as well, and it can be used as an antidote to incivility. We know that a friendly greeting in the street can shift the mood of a whole neighbourhood if it's done often enough by enough people. A calm, curious response can de-escalate an unpleasant conversation. We know that face-to-face connection through research is still the biggest predictor of belonging, which is really important. It means that every time we stop and make eye contact or genuinely listen in our workplace or street or sporting club, that we're building resilience, not just for ourselves, but also our communities. And it's something that all of us can do. It doesn't need a budget and it doesn't need any permission. It's not a policy, it's a practice every single day. It's easy to do because it's also when one person decides that they'll be the first to smile or that they'll be the first to pick up that rubbish. And it really is just as easy as that. It doesn't cost anything at all. So now we've looked at what happens when civility fades in society and the good news about it. But we'll have a little bit of a look now at how to rebuild it. One of the aspects of good news is that communities already have what they need in order to grow from the ground, to grow civility from the ground up. It starts on footpaths, libraries, front yards, and those everyday spaces where people can bump into each other and bump in and not be worried about somebody yelling at them or swearing at them. We want people to be crossing paths and then at that split second in time to decide how they're going to treat each other. And that's intercultural interaction. It's not just about language or faith. Intercultural isn't just about language or faith or where you were born, but it's also the culture of the neighbourhood or a workplace or a public space such as a bike park or a dog park. And it's also about how we're curious, how we bring curiosity to connect with other people, either non-verbally or by having positive interactions with people we don't yet know. So we know that moments of small actions can have big impacts. And one of those moments is that one about microaggression or micro incivility. But I also like to talk about micro kindness and the actions that remind each of us that we actually matter to ourselves and to other people and to our broader community. Psychologists tell us that positive emotion doesn't spread as quickly as negativity, but it does last longer if we can get it right. So one pleasant exchange can set the tone for an entire day. And if you've been on the receiving end of incivility, it can make you feel like if you've been on the receiving end of civility, it can make you feel like you actually belong there, which is so important. We recently ran a program that we've created called People Are Stories, and it's an intercultural methodology that we run in libraries or community centres. We ran one about 2 weeks ago in a library over at Footscray, not very far from where I live, and we had 5 storytellers who had 2 people in each of their little circle who didn't know each other and they didn't know them. And they just talked for an hour, and that intercultural sharing led to 23% increase in all of the participants' confidence and competence in working interculturally. And more importantly for me is that they had a greater understanding of a person whose story they may not ordinarily have known and that they may have had stereotypes about. So our 5 storytellers, some were born overseas. 2 of them talked about leaving their country due to conflict. One talked about her international aid work. One man told the story of being gay and trying to find his place in society in his early adulthood. And one man talked about growing up in Melbourne in the 1950s and how there's that sentiment about living back in the 1950s. We want that community back. But how Melbourne is a more interesting and vibrant place because of its diversity. And these were all people with stories, like every single one of us on the webinar today. We all have a story. And that's how civility becomes contagious in a society. It's just by getting to know each other. And I keep saying it, and I keep saying to people, it is not difficult. We just need to talk to each other. One of my favourite examples of this comes from Melton, which is a local government area about 40 kilometres west of Melbourne. And a few years ago, Melton City Council used a portion of their existing community grants to encourage intercultural applications for funding. And there were a whole lot of really interesting projects, but my favourite was an Iraqi and Nepalese community project to join together to teach their kids to swim. And as English wasn't the main language of any of the parents, it was wonderful for me to see them laughing together and pointing out their kids and being proud of the kids' progress. And also to see how they became friendlier and more confident about being around each other as the swimming lesson weeks went on. And people might say that that's a really small project, but it ended up that parents were starting to cheer for other people's children as well as their own. Now, that funding was very small. It came from an existing pot of money. There was no extra expense to council, but it just took a new category within the existing pot of money to create ongoing civility within those 2 communities. Now, it hasn't happened yet to my knowledge, but one of the things that I'd really love to see promote civility and intercultural and interfaith interaction is that when there's international conflict that's impacting our communities, we could create a public mural that just says "Still Talking" written on it, because it shows that there are people in local communities who see that resolution is possible, but also that they act as a role model for the importance of conversation to keep peace and belonging and intercultural interaction and civility. And in Melbourne, I'm not sure how many people here are from Melbourne itself. We've just gone through a really tough time in a whole range of different areas, and in some places we're still going through a tough time. And I think if we tell other people that we are still talking, we're still getting through this, then what we end up developing is a sense of leadership and the ability to say to people, we are, because we're still talking, lifting ourselves up and out of these situations. And I think when I hear of people saying it was just a talk fest, I don't think we talk enough. So I love talk fests. I think we should always have talk fests. Now, the one thing that I want to mention before I finish up is about micro leaders. And they're the coaches who make sure that every child gets to play at least a part of a game. The childcare educators who make sure that children's colour or faith is reflected in the books that all children are reading. The youth worker who helps a gay young person navigate the personal issues that they might be experiencing, or the boss who thanks staff at the end of every day. And we know through this People Are Stories methodology that we have that our storytellers have a commitment to increasing intercultural understanding. And it's that leads to a greater sense of belonging and civility. They put themselves at risk, but they've got that commitment to make sure that people are talking and hearing each other. And as I said before, it's also about the faith leaders who decide to model civil, inclusive and cohesive behaviour through things like still talking. I'll wrap up now because I know that we're starting to finish up. I'm starting to run out of time, but I want to say that I know that we all know that in 2025, Australian society and our neighbourhoods are fragile. We've all understood that. We've all talked about that through putting numbers up to my slides earlier. Many people are feeling overwhelmed and isolated, and they're feeling unheard in their communities. But we know that every small act of civility, every small act of incivility causes the problem. Every small act of civility fixes the problem. And we can do this by greeting someone every time we see them. We can talk and listen to them, because that's the kind of investment that we're wanting for Australia. We can ask the name of our neighbours if they're new and we don't know them. We can also stop, which I try to do all the time when I'm in Melbourne in particular, is to stop and help someone who's lost, because I've had so much experience of that lately that I always thought it was a really kind thing to do. We know also that stories fade the stereotypes that we might have about other people, and that when we hear and understand what someone's overcome, we actually develop empathy, and we understand, and we develop empathy and understand about the fact that there might be other people walking down the street or in our personal network who have experienced something similar. We don't have to fix the world, and actually we can't do that, but I think we just have to fix the tone that we bring to our own neighbourhood and our own postcode. There are so many ways that we can do this, and I know there was a question before about how we might be able to do this at the local level. I've just talked about a whole lot of those things, but one of the ideas that I had the other day is a local cafe, for example, being able to put up a chalkboard or something out the front where neighbours can write thank you to each other, or the local IGA or whatever it is. People can actually shout out the good things that are happening in their community. Similarly, they might want to put something on Facebook. So it could be a thank you to the person who brought in their rubbish bins, or to say thank you to someone who helped fix their bike, or who helped to pull something down off the shelf at a supermarket. It's those sort of things, and that in that public way, that we are saying to people, we notice really good things around here, and we're very grateful to live in this community. And I think that once people realise that kindness gets noticed, they start to do more of it themselves. So I think also, as we finish up, that sustaining civility isn't about everyone agreeing. And in fact, disagreement is essential to a healthy society. We cannot ask people to not say what they want to say sometimes. What we want to do, though, is to understand that the way that we handle it is determining whether or not we grow stronger, or whether or not our society fractures. When you look at it closely, civility isn't soft. It's actually really radical, because it refuses to let rudeness and impatience set the tone for my day and your day and our community's day. And I think that's probably one of the most powerful things that we can be doing in communities right now. I want also to come back to something simple, that civility is about persistence. We have to choose again and again and again to meet people with respect. And that's us, because people may not do that to us, but we have to make those choices. And we have to do that especially when we're tired, or we're busy, or we're frustrated, and we don't want to be standing in line, and we just want to get home, put dinner on. That's the kind of time when we need to be making sure that we are acting in a manner that is civil towards others. It helps us to take ownership also of our shared spaces. And it also allows us to start thinking to ourselves, well, hang on, actually, I'll go first. I'll pick up this rubbish first. I'll say hello first. I'll be the one in line who lets somebody else in. And that's how kindness becomes culture in a community, and it's how civility lasts for the long term in a community. So what I'd like from today is that if you can take one small thing with you, it's that small actions can create big outcomes, and that civility starts wherever we are with whatever we've got, and that we can take a breath before we react. We can wave to someone, we can thank someone, we can listen to someone. None of those things cost us any money or really any time, but it's how we're going to build a better, fairer, kinder, more civil and sophisticated and intercultural neighbourhoods. And also, I think if we extrapolate that we're then going to be building a much better Australia, because I do worry now about where we're going to end up if we keep going. But I am looking forward to how it is that we start to work through this and bring us to a point where people are feeling much safer in their own communities because of civility that we've started. So thank you very much for your attention today. And Charles, I'm not sure whether we have some questions there or some comments that people might like to make.
Linda, thank you for that. I've been saying now for a number of months in conversations with people that I think the art of debating has been lost. And I think one of the things that debating actually teaches each and every one of us is the ability to disagree with another person on the other side of the debating room, but not actually get vexatious or angry or aggressive at them, but understand the issue. And I think just going back 2 or 3 slides, the Ruth Bader Ginsburg comment, we can disagree, but without being disagreeable. I think there's some real strength in that commentary. Thank you. That was a great presentation. I'm going to share this with a lot more people.
Thank you for that, Charles. Now, I'll just stop sharing my screen.
Sure.
And hopefully that's worked.
So Jeff had a question, and that was, if the man had been nearly run over before in the car park, was that any defense? Thank you, Jeff.
No. I actually didn't nearly run him over. Jeff, he came running out of the shop. He was walking out of the doors, so he was not even near the road. He decided he was going to run over at me. So no, I nearly didn't. I didn't nearly run him over, although I did think about it when I was reversing. I'm kidding.
We probably have a situation in Hay where people come to town and they don't know how to reverse park, and you've got to suggest politely that perhaps they should do it the other way so they don't get fined. But it is a bit of a discussion point. But yeah, on that case, yes, you wonder what got under his skin to spark him up, sort of thing. But
nothing. Yeah. But it's who he is, it's who his wife is, and we're always going to meet people like that, unfortunately. But he could have said something like, "You're going the wrong way, you wombat." That could have been a nice way of telling me that.
Very true. Very true. If anybody's got any questions they'd like to ask them, or if you want to come off mute, Alan, you've popped up there. I'm sure you've got a fantastic question for Linda. You're always got some good ones. Is there a question you've got for her?
Thank you, Charles. Great presentation, Linda, and wholeheartedly agree. We hold what we call Community Cafe, which is just having to facilitate neighbours getting to know their neighbours. It's a strange scenario to be in a place like Perth, but no, thank you for the presentation. It's a lot of insightful information there, and I'll certainly be following up as we take a trajectory. I don't know if you've come across a civic wealth creation, and about how we go back to community getting more involved in owning and the outcomes in their community. And maybe if we came together as a collective and discussed the fact that there's a lot of this insightful language happening, then maybe we could call it out as a group rather than as an individual.
Yeah, I agree. And I have heard about that recently, Alan, and I've been doing some reading about it, but there are conversations, particularly in local governments in Victoria, about community wealth. So I think it's something people are starting to talk about.
Fantastic.
Andrew's got a question here. Is there a role for public health style campaigns to help reinforce kindness norms as part of the mix?
I think there are. I think, though, that it could be done without any money at all. So it could just be asking people, rather than spending a lot of money on a campaign that people may not necessarily take notice of. It could be about just getting together a group of volunteers and having conversations with them about what sort of things could we do to create more kindness and more civility in our community. And some of the things that I talked about may well be the sort of things that they suggest. So let's just have the notice board out the front of the IGA, or let's just say hello to each other every single opportunity we get. Just nod, just say hello, just smile. So yes, I think there is a place for that. I think you could bring it back to the first stages of it and just get that civility to normalise in the community. And from that point, then maybe you can do some more campaigning along the way. But I'd just bring it back to that to start with.
Yeah. I wonder if there's and it's almost a non-government sort of position. I wonder whether across the sporting codes and across the arts, there are enough influencers who would put their name to a campaign that could be socially funded by some high net worth Australians who actually truly value a civil society, as to whether or not there could be a campaign created around that. Peter, I noticed you're Peter Kenyon in Western Australia there. Peter, if you're free to join us and unmute and share, I can see some of these conversations that Linda has presented today in civility across rural communities. You want to give us your feedback and thoughts on that, please?
Well, firstly, thank you, Linda. I think you just demystified that so well, and I loved the examples you used. I thought that's what we need. I think there are just two things I'd like to add, and I think it really is an extension of what you said. I think the first is, and it all, I think, comes back to leadership. I think how leaders within communities, and particularly within our rural communities, actually walk the talk, demonstrate this stuff. How do we make people feel more appreciated, more valued in terms of what we did, what we do, and just often actually, deliberately remembering to try to do this, to thank people. I just don't think we thank people enough in terms of how we do it. And I think really the most critical role, I think, of a leader is to make everybody feel a somebody, and how we might go about that. I have a little thing I love to do when I get incredible customer service in cafes, and it's usually in 80% of cases, not 20%. I think we've got incredible customer service. I'll often say to people, "Can I give you some feedback?" And immediately their face drops, because the word feedback immediately means criticism. And I say, "I want to tell you, this is the best customer service I've actually had for a long, long time. You are amazing." I did that the other day in a cafe, and the young girl then cartwheeled back to the counter to say to all of her mates, "Do you know what he just told me?" I was out, she was just shocked that people would actually use that. And I thought, you know what? I do that all the time, and I can tell you 90% of cases, it makes their day. The number of people who will say to me, "You know what? You've made my day. That's the best thing I've heard all week." And yet, what did it cost me? It cost me nothing. I had a bit of fun in terms of actually doing it. I think the other thing that we've got to get back to in leadership, and particularly at local government levels and whatever, is begin to see that, again, one of our critical roles is to host conversations between people. Get what you said, getting those people who don't normally come together. And I think, without doubt, hosting conversations is probably the most critical thing that any leaders can actually do. And I think, again, there are so many little things, fostering street parties, finding simple ways that actually bring kind of like people together. And above all, I think beginning to discover, I think the most incredible thing about asset mapping is that everyone cares about something. Everyone is special. Everyone has something. And how, again, we actually bring that to the forefront in what we actually do in local government. I think we've got to get away from this thing that our role is to do things to and for people. Our role is to do things with people, but above all, open the space of and by the people. And the more that we can discover what people have to contribute, and we invite participation and whatever. And I see that over and over with, ethnic migrant communities, when you actually invite people to take a role, stand up, do something that they valued, share something they know about, kind of like demonstrate how to cook something. Their whole sense of value within community just changes dramatically. And I suppose it's about getting back to the basics for me, and how we actually build that in a lot more than we actually are at the present time. I think we're just spending so much time behind a computer designing things for people and whatever. We just need to see that our role as leaders is to foster relationships, bring the best out of people, make everybody feel somebody. And if we can just get back to some of those ways we could do that, I think that would be a great way forward.
Excellent. Thank you, Peter. Linda, any feedback for Peter?
There's a lot. So there's a lot of things I've been writing down here. I mean, one of them, if you get a chance and you don't already know about it, is something called asset-based community development, which Peter has been doing for, I won't say 1,000 years, Peter, but for all of the time that I've known about you. And so that's a really worthwhile methodology to look at. And if you just Google asset-based community development, you'll find a whole lot of their resources and tools actually on the website. And again, it's a way of being able to bring civility back into conversations. And as Peter said, it's not about doing things for people, it's doing it with them, or starting something off and then stepping back and letting them do it for themselves. So it's a really, there are a lot of different tools, really interesting process. I also, one of the things that I was thinking about, but I didn't end up putting in, is how easy it would be at schools, for example, for teachers every morning to wish students in their class happy birthday if they don't do that already. Or if there are assemblies every day at school wishing children happy birthday, so that those kids during the day then can have conversations with each other because they're sharing a birthday, or people can wish them happy birthday. So again, these things don't need to cost any money whatsoever. I want to come back to Andrew's discussion about the role of public health, which is that I do think that there's a role, particularly for something like environmental, what I see as being environmental incivility, which is Keep Australia Beautiful. I grew up with that campaign when I was a kid. KeepSAB, or it might have even been South Australia when I grew up in South Australia. Keep South Australia Beautiful. And it was a real campaign to make sure that, kids picked up litter on their way to school, or that if we were at a sporting club, no one dropped anything. You didn't leave a can of Coke. You certainly didn't throw a plastic bottle away when you were walking down the street. So maybe something like that, again, from that public health perspective, because also litter is unpleasant and it infects waterways and it does all of those other things. So that may well be some kind of relationship between an environmental campaign and a public health campaign, for example. And then there's one more that I see down here from Jocelyn and also from Andrew. And I wanted to sound pretty proud of myself actually about Random Acts of Kindness, which is in 1998, I was reading or 1997, I was reading something that came out of America well and truly before the internet. And I heard about this Random Acts of Kindness Day. And at the time I was living in Beenleigh, which is a community in between Brisbane and the Gold Coast. And I knew that the 17th of February was RAOK Day, as they used to call it. And so I asked them to send me over all of the materials that we could use here. And it was the first Random Acts of Kindness Day in Australia, and that was 17th of February 1998. And we were able to get the Rotary Club involved. They were fantastic. We were able to get the Beenleigh Rum Distillery involved as a venue to be able to have activities. We had a little fete kind of thing on the weekend of the 17th of February. So I really would recommend that that's one way of doing it too. And I don't mean a festival, I mean at a neighbourhood level. What are the things? And then get people to write on Facebook, what's someone done that's really kind for you this week? Because it's hard to troll somebody if you're writing down what someone has done for you that's kind this week. So that might be one of the things, and I am very proud now. I don't know how many years ago 98 is, but a long time, but to have been involved in that. And from the very beginning. And then I know there was a committee that formed after that, et cetera, et cetera. So it's really nice that we're still talking about it all these years later. And then the only other thing that I wanted to talk about was, Peter, remembering something that you talked about at your presentation a few weeks ago, Peter said, that was having only 4 people at a table for a conversation. And I can't believe at my age and all of these years of experience, I never thought to only ever have 4 people at a table. You know, like, of course it's happened before and it's the way it's worked out, but it's never occurred to me to make sure that I only ever have 4 people at a table, because that's where conversation gets to happen across, and it's the number of people for that intimate kind of conversation. So Peter, thank you for that. That's really changed a whole lot of the way that I'll be practicing in future as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Linda. Yes, in fact, this morning, a friend of mine shared with me a text message, and she said, this reminds me of you. It was about a gentleman in Italy who runs an Italian restaurant, and he closes every Tuesday, but he noticed that his community was becoming more and more insular. So he decided that he would knock on the door of everybody who lived around his restaurant on Tuesdays and invite them for dinner. And so he put on the dinner in his restaurant free of charge for the community. And to the point that it's literally a sellout process. And people are out in the street and they're eating and drinking and celebrating on a Tuesday night. And all these people who never knew each other have come out of the woodwork to be part of his community around his restaurant, yet they've lived there. People who lived in the building next door upstairs and whatever, just coming together as a community, I think is fantastic. I'd love to see Random Acts of Kindness as a national day far more pronounced. Did anybody else not know of that day? Anybody here? No? I'd never heard of it before. Anyway, does anybody have any other questions for Linda on this issue of civility? I think civility, in fact, I registered a domain name a number of years ago called civilsociety.org, but it's still registered. But anyway, anybody have any other final questions for Linda? It's great to have this sorts of open discussion. And please, after you've got the video of this presentation today, please share it around. Linda, can we get a copy of the slides to share with the video?
Yep, I can do that. And also people are welcome to link with me on LinkedIn as well, because I skipped through a whole lot of that intercultural interaction today, but that's really what I do for pretty much all of my life these days is intercultural work. Interculturalism is about bringing together people who are born overseas, people born in Australia, particularly from 3rd or more generations, and also First Nations people, so that we're not just talking about multicultural or First Nations, we're actually bringing people together to create relationships. So I didn't put that in the slides, but I will put that in the next one. And all of the stuff I've ever written about interculturalism, well, not that I've ever written, but a whole lot of it is on the LinkedIn pages as well.
Excellent. I'll also share with each of you some links to the items that Linda mentioned during the presentation, so you can download the relevant reports from other parties as well. Jeff, I'm glad you didn't get a chance to write many emails. That's great. You were paying attention. That's awesome. I love it. Nothing worse than listening to a webinar and doing work on the side. Linda has a website, yes. We'll share that with each and every one of you. But Linda, the website address is?
mosaicis.com.au. So it stands for Mosaic Intercultural Solutions.com.au.
Excellent.
And can I just say, I just want to bring attention to what Andrew said here about what he was doing with training. So not telling any of the participants when he was doing training, but actually contacting their workplaces to give feedback about their contributions, so that when they got back to work, that they were given a wrap by their manager for their contributions to the day. I think that's fantastic. I haven't heard of that before. That's a good one.
Excellent. Now I'll finish up with the fact that we have one more presentation from Linda on the 26th of November. And the subject for that day is The Future is Local. Communities that don't talk together don't last together. So we'll put that link for that webinar in the email with this video. So it'll be quite a jam-packed informational email coming out to you all. But it'll be the last one from Rebuilding Australia for the year. You can view all these videos via the Rebuilding Australia website and or the YouTube channel. But thank you once and again for all of you attending today. Great to have you. Linda, thank you for a wonderful, thought-provoking presentation. And you and I will talk, and we'll see each other again on the 26th of November.
Lovely, thank you. And I've popped the correct web address into the chat box. Sorry, it's mosaicis, I missed out that s.com.au. Thank you so much, Charles, and I really love working with you, and thank you so much for getting me ready for each of these presentations. Thank you so much, everyone. It's good to meet you all.